Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Cheryl Costa. Before I bring her on, I'm going to remind you that you can always get new episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. Check us out on Rokfin. This is where you get our awesome premium content that you can't get anywhere else, and all the amazing content from every creator there on Rokfin. Just click that link in the description, sign up, and you can check it out with a free account. And definitely check out the new amazing podcast by the Forbidden Knowledge News Network with Raised by Giants with Ryder Lee. We have Day Zero with myself, Cory Hughes, Charlie Robinson, and X-Cube 420, and Dawson Time with Ryan Dawson and Cory Hughes. Those are all available on all podcast platforms right now. And finally, if you're reaching that stage in life, like me, where you're getting some of those gray hairs and you might feel a little bit run down at times, check out C60 Purple Power, maybe the most powerful antioxidant known to man. It has helped me with inflammation, energy, sleep, well-being, and the list goes on. And you can get C60 for your pets. Your pets can feel awesome too. Click the link in the description. You get 10% off your order plus free shipping. Tonight I want to welcome back to the show Cheryl Costa. She is a native and resident of upstate New York. She is a two-service military veteran for the United States Air Force and Navy, and a retired professional from the aerospace industry. As a journalist, she wrote the wildly popular UFO column New York Skies for SyracuseNewTimes.com from 2013 to 2019. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the State University of New York at Empire State College in entertainment writing and production. She was awarded Researcher of the Year in 2018 by the International UFO Congress. Cheryl, welcome back, and how are you doing tonight?
Very good, Chris. Very good.
Yeah, it's been a long time since you've last been on, almost like 2 years, I believe. So we've got a lot to catch up on. As you know, so much has changed, not only on our planet in general, but the world of ufology. In the mainstream, UFOs have become UAPs, and now they're acknowledged by our government and military, but only that they don't know what they're dealing with and could possibly be a threat to national security. At least that's what comes across to me. Me, of course, being a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy guy, I don't trust the government media that much, or the information coming from those sources, but that's just me. I personally believe that the real disclosure has been coming from researchers like yourself, contactees and experiencers of the phenomenon, and people that really, dig deep and do the research themselves. And it's been a long time since you've been on, like I said. I would love it if you could remind the audience a little bit about what brought you to this field of research.
I saw my first UFO when I was 12 with my parents. A silver ball parked out there in a 4 o'clock in the afternoon, clear blue western sky, and it was a big sphere. And give people an idea how big it was, if you put your arm out and look at your little fingernail, it was that big. And it sat out there like a rock. And my mother explained that this is 65-ish, so NASA had only been around 4 or 5 years. The Air Force was doing things. So she said it might be the Air Force, it could be NASA, it might be a weather balloon. Then she looked at me and says, it might be people from another world. And that fascinated the 12, 13-year-old, Yeah. And we watched it for a few minutes, finally got back on the road, got down to the bottom of the hill, turned left to head back towards the hometown. And my dad had a big old black Chevy Impala in those days. And they had a big window in the back. And I crawled up and says, who are you guys? Who are you guys? When that thing decided to leave, I didn't see an effect like that again until about 1992 with one of the Starfleet movies. It was one of those kind of things, and thing like that changes you, So, how teenagers, mom and dad and teenagers, mom and dad are stupid, that kind of thing. We disagreed on a lot of stuff, but my mom and I could talk about UFOs pretty sanely. And she used to get books at the library. I got books at the library. We'd read them to each other, things like this. And heck, when late 60s, when I was about a junior in high school, um, we got a copy of Von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. Okay. And she dog-eared on the top of the paperback. I dog-eared on the bottom. The book was like destroyed from all the dog-earing. But that was pretty much the first one. And the second one was 6 years later when I was in the Air Force. I was 18, 19, I was 19 years old. I was in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. It was 11:30 at night, Christmas Eve. A buddy of mine and I were going to go down to the base chapel and go to midnight mass. And we were walking down, and it was one of those beautifully clear starlit nights. And where we were stationed had very low light pollution. Okay. There was no traffic on the runway, so they had the runway lights down real low. And we saw this thing streaking across the sky. And my friend said, it's a jet. And then it stops. And I said, well, jets don't stop and helicopters don't go that fast. And we sat there and looked at it for a minute. And I said, I've been doing a lot of reading. I said, that's what I think it is. It's going to start dancing around like a fairy. Darn it. Start go on. And needless to say, neither one of us had our minds at midnight mass when we got out of the chapel. I pretty much followed this stuff all through my adult life. Now, from that point on, I had a security clearance. I was in the Air Force, and then I turned around. I was in the Navy. Then I turned around and went to work for like Lockheed Martin for the next 32 years. So I was always under the force of a high security clearance, and they frowned on being members of like MUFON, things like that. And so that was pretty much the end. And I retired in 2011. And when I did, I went to work for a newspaper. Wasn't a journalist. I was a technical person. And one night we had just started the night run for the morning edition, and big 700 ton Swiss press. And I saw a little sidebar story on a web news thing. I think it was CNN.com. And in the little sidebar story, 150 words said, UFOs have been declining since the 1980s. Maybe they were always just an urban legend. And I'd done enough reading over 25, 30 years to say, that doesn't sound right, And then, so what I did was for the first time in my life ever, I went out to the National UFO Reporting Center. And I found some back pages where they had some year-end totals. So I just added up the year-end totals, put it into a little spreadsheet. And the thing went up like a rocket. Okay. Went up like a rocket. And I said, they're supposed to be declining. What memo didn't the UFOs get? That kind of thing. And that got my attention. And I started reading some of the UFO. In the next couple of nights, I started reading the UFO reports. Once the press got running, all we had to do was sit back for 2 hours and wait, So I was looking at these stories, and they weren't the kooky stories people led you to believe. That the only people who reported these things were kooks, nuts, and crackpots. They were very sincere people. I never saw a thing like this before. We were on the hood of my car watching the stars, my wife and I, and we saw this thing. We never believed, my God, there it was, and those kinds of stories. People were sincere, and they were reporting what they saw, and they thought it was their duty to report what they saw. And that got my attention. So I was a budding journalist at that point, and I started taking these stories and writing them, making them a little bit more palatable, a little bit more journalistic. And I started pitching them to a bunch of newspaper reporters or newspaper editors. And I got chased out of offices and all this kind of stuff, escorted to the door by security at one place. And finally, I got a little weekly newspaper up here, the Syracuse New Times, said that they offered to try me out for a month. And at the end of a month, the editor called me in and said, "You're a rock star. You're drawing more page views than all the columnists combined with your topic matter." Of course, he grinned at me. He says, "We sort of knew that, didn't we? That it'd be hot, And I wrote the column for the next 7 years until the paper went under, like a lot of newspapers are doing right now. And it was a lot of fun. It was a weekly column. Now, people probably think that writing a weekly newspaper column is, wow, that must be fun. I said, no, it's a 500 word term paper every Thursday night,
Right.
do every
Yeah.
Thursday night. People don't get that. And when you're sitting there and wincing and going, what am I going to write about this week? That's how I got into the statistics. I started adding up the stuff here in New York State, since New York State was my beat. And at one point, I'd been doing it for a little over a year, and we had finally got around and did all the counties in New York State. And my wife and I had gotten a whole bunch of old timer, former MUFON guys to look the stuff over. And they were pulling their hair out and said, hey, we didn't know there was a cluster there. We didn't know there was a cluster there either. And the reason was we had bothered to add county data to the database. Nobody had done that before. It was always just cities and states.
Right.
And the moment we started putting county data to it, we started seeing regional clusters. And that was a big deal, because up until then, everybody thought everything was in the Hudson Valley or up on Lake Erie, the Lake Erie effect. And when we did this, we discovered that Monroe County, essentially Rochester, New York, on Lake Ontario, had almost as many sightings as the Lake Erie. And the Hudson Valley wasn't ground zero. It turned out that Suffolk County, Long Island was ground zero, had 3 times as many sightings, that type of thing. So it revealed a lot of stuff to us. So Linda and I, my wife, she's a bona fide scientist. She's got the degrees. Me, I got an arts and entertainment writing degree. So I've got the top hat and the cane. And she's got the science degrees, and said, let's put some science to this. Let's do a census of UFOs. Let's do the entire country. And we sat there with our pints saying, oh my God, this could take a year. It took 18 months because we didn't know what we were doing. And the things we did in 18 months before, I did in 750 hours this time. Instead of 2,000 hours, I did in about 700 hours this time around.
Wow, that's awesome. And when it comes to your statistics, that's a great place to start tonight. I think we should go over maybe some of the main categories that you focus on with the UFO statistics.
Well, okay. In the original book, we focused principally on the volumes nationally, and then at the state level, and then at the county level, okay, for each of the states. That's what we focused on. And we discovered that there was an issue with, depending upon the latitude that your state was in the United States, made a difference on the pattern of your monthly sightings. Nobody knew this before. And it turns out there's a temperate weather factor. So people always knew that, well, population's a driver. Okay, yeah, okay. But we also found out that temperate weather was a driver. Who knew? In the new book, we had it come out. We had it the last 5 years to crunch the data different ways, rainy afternoons, that kind of thing, and can't sleep at night. Open up the spreadsheet, do some crunching. And what we discovered was there are 5 drivers. Bear with me. I like to have it in front of me before I state it. Yeah. There are 5 drivers. We found out there are 5 drivers and 5 influencers. Drivers affect every place, and the influencers affect some places. Population is a driver. Temperate weather is a driver. Leisure time is a driver. Hours of darkness is a driver. And the observer access to broadband is a driver. Who knew? Okay. And then the influencers are proximity to large bodies of water, proximity to toxic ecosystems, proximity to geological fault lines, high visibility media reports, and something we call the generational effect. And that's the biggest things we measure at this point. The biggest push for us was being able to confirm the leisure time thing, which we suspected back in 2017. We couldn't prove it at the time, but what actually what proved it for us was the back in March and April of 2020 during the COVID lockdown. A lot of fans called me up and says, hey, we're going into a lockdown. This should be a good test of leisure time, right? And by golly, the sightings were through the roof on those 2 months, nationally. And by the way, the UFOs had fallen off from 2014 to about 2018, about 30% a year. They had tanked. And I kept telling everybody, don't worry, guys, they'll come back. People were writing me saying, oh, the Space Force chased them away. Oh my God, they ran out of grants. They went home, whatever. This is part of a 6 to 8 year cycle. So this is something else we watch. So bottom line, the national numbers now, 2001 to 2020, 167,632 reported sightings between MUFON and NUFORC. It's 60-40 ratio. NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, they're about 60%. MUFON's about 40%.
That's very interesting. Now, I want to kind of go over some of the most profound statistics for some of those categories. Let's start with the you mentioned leisure time and how during, post 2020, during lockdown and pandemic, the sightings went through the roof. Were there any other recent periods in modern history where we've seen, such an increase in sightings?
No, not really. Not since 2014. Well, 2010 to 2012, 13 type of thing was the up part of the curve. And 2014, 13, 14, heading down to 2018, were the downside of the curve. So you have this sort of bell curve. The sightings go up and they go down. And there were people who did not believe me on this. So when we did the second book here, we call it the Pink Book. When we did the second book, I got additional information for both MUFON and NUFORC, and I went back to 1960. People kept saying, why didn't you go back 40 years? Well, we did. And there's two things. One, there's a perception that UFOs were better back then and there was more of them. Well, it was back in the 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, newspapers still reported them. In 68, after the Condon report, newspaper said, well, this is all baloney. We're not going to report them anymore. That or the CIA got to them, one or the other. But bottom line is newspapers stopped reporting UFO sightings on a general basis. And at least even the local sightings, if they got reported, they never tiered up to the wire and they never got out into the bigger mainstream press. So what happened was I went back to 1960 and brought it up to 2000. This is the year before we started our data, 2001 to 2020. And we did a graph, and you could see the sightings every 6 to 8 years going up and down, up and down, up and down, like a little snake going across the grass, right? And then we put it next to the 2001 to 2020 numbers, and this is what it looked like. Okay. Barely 500, somewhere between 200 and 500 a year. In 2001, it went up to 4,500, and then, huge numbers up. Now, the number between 2000, from 1960 to 2000 added up to 13,150 sightings. Now, that sounds like a lot. I had that many with 2012, 2013, and 2014 each year. Okay. So people say, well, the 40s and 50s were the golden age of UFOs. No, we are living in the golden age of UFOs.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You also mentioned, was it toxic environment is one of the factors? Yes. Okay, that's interesting.
That wasn't one of my measurements. I have a colleague here in New York State. I think you may have interviewed him. I'm not sure. Thomas W. Conwell.
Yeah, had him on a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Great guy. Okay.
Definitely.
He took our original book and he went out there and he destroyed a wall in his house. He was putting pins in a map, and he started tracking different reasons why the UFOs were certain clusters in certain areas. Some of the clusters were like in a straight line, and he'd get it along a heavily polluted river or a heavily polluted lake. Dead mining towns, dead strip mines, brown fields, dead gas fields, dead oil fields, strip mines. Okay. ET is extremely interested in our waste areas. We're wrecking the planet as far as they're concerned. And if you go back and talk to the people from Free, Dr. Edgar Mitchell's foundation, of the 3,400 experiences they talked to, they said, hey, ET said, take care of our planet. Okay. And that's been a consistent message. Even when those kids back, down in South Africa, back in the 60s, they were told, take care of your planet, So it's pretty evident from that. Now, the other thing they seem interested in is the geological fault lines, particularly the ones that are pretty unstable, and that they seem to haunt those a lot as well, according to Tom. And I take his word for it because that's what he does. He just uses our data, and he gave me the feedback.
I've also had a couple of researchers say that they also frequent volcanic activity.
Yes.
There's a lot of sightings in Mexico recently with the volcanoes down there.
Yes. A few years ago, there was that, about 10, 12 years ago, there was that volcano that went off kind of unexpectedly up in Iceland.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
There was video footage from a Danish television station, and they were looking at the clouds of smoke coming up, and then they panned off to the edge of the cloud of smoke going up, and there is this thing. It looks like a triangular shaped craft sitting there, and it must have had a force field because it looked like it was encased in glass.
Wow.
And they cut away from it immediately.
Yeah, of course they did. Oh,
so they do hang out around these kinds of events.
Now, you mentioned triangle craft. Now, I know there is evidence that we have our own version of this triangle craft, that the TR3, possibly. So this brings us to my next question of how much do you think of these sightings are ours? Like that could be,
let me ask you a question of you. How big have you ever heard how big the TR3B is?
I've heard different versions, so I couldn't tell you.
Okay, the versions I've heard has been just like as big as a 747 or something like that, right?
Yeah, no bigger than a normal jet or anything like that.
Okay, fine. The black triangle I saw at 3:30 in the morning one night coming home from the newspaper was over a football field long, 2 stories deep, putting along at about 35, 40 miles an hour, had the red light on the bottom, the 3 golden globes on the back, and it was just sitting there with a humming sound going, and looking like it wasn't in a hurry to go anyplace, just going off into the northeast, and people say, well, why didn't you take pictures of it with your cell phone? I was standing there in shock and awe going,
Yeah. Same thing happens to everybody, man. I've heard, same thing happened to me too.
For me, what was a funny thing was I had this ritual when I came home at night. It's like typically about 3:30 in the morning, and I close the garage door, and I'd stand there and look over my neighbor's fence, and right over the neighbor's fence, if the sky was clear, I could see the Big Dipper and the North Star, that kind of thing, and bright stars at night. And I used to just stand there and kind of like a little ritual, clear my head, everything's okay with the world, the stars are still there and everything. And I start noticing this black V-shaped thing blotting out the stars above me and going, what? And it's strange. I sketched the thing in a little notebook upstairs after I saw it, wrote down everything I could about the time and everything, date and time. And a couple of years later, after I was writing UFO columns, I showed the thing to Dave Marler. He's the expert on triangles. And he said, oh yeah, that's the standard configuration, so I don't think that's a TR3B. Okay. I really don't. I think a TR3B does not fly along at 35, 40, 50 miles an hour. And I doubt the thing hums. I think the thing probably whines like a regular jet engine kind of thing, So that's my feeling.
Yeah, I have also heard different sightings that much larger versions of triangles and much different than the standard TR3 description, which is very interesting as well. So we could be dealing with many, many different types of triangle craft,
Well, that's true. Triangle craft have been reported back since since around World War II or slightly after. I had one report that I researched. The guy, it was in July of 1947. This thing was hovering over a bar, in downstate New York, someplace, and they described it pretty much in the detail that we hear these days. So I'd like to see another one, frankly. And my wife got to see when we were coming back from the Thousand Islands, and I'd fallen asleep in the passenger side. And next thing you know, I'm waking up. I'm waking up, and she's got the car pulled off the side of the road. And I said, "What's going on?" She says, "I just saw one of the triangles, and it flew into a hole in the sky. It must have opened a portal or something." So yeah, we've seen some pretty scary stuff the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, have you done any research on possible military encounters with UFOs? Any statistics about that, or
No,
actual threatening encounters?
no, no. We strictly monitor the United States, two, civilian sightings.
Hmm.
Okay. So that was pretty much what we do. I did do a thing where people asked me, well, do they loiter around our nuclear power plants?
That was another question of mine.
Okay. That's a common question I get. And there are sufficient activist sites out there about that kind of thing. So I looked up all 55 civilian nuclear power plants are listed on this one particular website, right down to their street address kind of thing. And so I was able to get county information and street address and information. And I ran every kind of report I had for that area. Okay. And even now in this state, the version of the database, we've added zip code information to the database. So I can literally plot UFOs by zip code anywhere in the country. Okay. Which is kind of fun. In fact, I did a map for all individual 50 states by zip code. Okay. What their patterns look like. And they don't blot the map out. There's holes in it. And then the other thing I did was I ran 29 of there's 33 shapes between both databases. And 29 of them are a definable shape. The other three are like unknown, other, that kind of thing. So I took the 29, I plotted every single one of them across the United States by zip code. I've got maps for it. It's really cool. And some of them some shapes predominate to certain shapes. Some shapes do not. Some are all over the place. Some are only in the south. Some are only in the west. Some are predominant up in the northeast, that kind of thing.
Now, how many sightings or encounters that you've researched would indicate that there's any kind of threat at all coming from this phenomenon?
Well, I was saying, when was the last time you heard of aliens coming down, going into a classroom, a schoolroom, and phasering the students? When
Right.
was the last time you heard of an alien spacecraft hovering above the interstate in your town and phasing traffic during a traffic jam? Okay. You don't hear about that. They don't do that kind of thing. Okay. People have done that sort of thing, but we don't do that sort of thing, or they don't do that thing.
Right.
So, I don't see the threat. If there's a threat, it's that is the military asking for money. Okay. You got it. In fact, if we're going to get congressional hearings, the thing I read that UAP report, and both me and Steve Bassett came to the same conclusion, especially on the unclassified version. Classified version was 75 pages, though. Remember that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The unclassified version used the word threat and security about 8 or 9 times each. So that probably gives the chairs of the House Intel Select Committee and the Senate Select Intel Committee of the ammunition they need to hold congressional hearings, something that those of us who are activists about this stuff been wanting to see for years. We want legitimate congressional hearings. And we hope that's what's going to happen. Now, Cheryl and Linda doing our part to be activists. Senator Rubio got a 5-pound package from me. Okay, our new pink book, the new book we've got. It is I would pull it out right for now, but I've got it holding up the computer right now. Okay. The Pink Book, 2001 to 2020, we gave him a copy of that with a page, a little yellow sticky page marking his home state of Florida. And the other thing we did was we ran off a special report for him. Remember, I can do zip codes, and congressmen and senators want to know about zip codes, right? So we printed off all. Florida is the number 2 state with 11,000 sightings in the last 20 years, 11,041, something like that. And we printed off a report for every zip code and their sightings. And it wasn't just the number of sightings. It was 2001 to 2020 across the top of the page. And then whatever shapes were reported and their approximate numbers under the date year. Okay. It was 1.5 inches thick. It weighed about 1.5 pounds itself. Okay. So when we put them both, we had to pack them in a box, packed it in, what do they call them? The peanuts, there was a nice cover letter on there and everything. And we shipped one to Senator Rubio about 4 weeks ago now. And we sent one to a New York representative that happened to be on the House Intel Committee. And we did a similar thing for New York State. We printed it out by zip codes so they could get an impression. We said, look, we gave them a very short introduction letter. Just the facts, a little executive summary, just the facts. We are the civilian experts on UFOs in the United States for their statistics. And we sent it to them, says, if you decide to have congressional hearings, invite us. That's activism.
Yeah.
Now think about it for this minute. We sort of had a heads up about this in 2020 during the lockdown. Some of the inside usual suspects in Washington about this topic matter said, you and Linda have done the only statistics done since Project Blue Book closed down in 1968. And I said, yeah, probably. And they said, well, if they have congressional hearings, you're the only people to call. I said, yeah, probably. So picture this. 2 old gay ladies testifying before Congress about UFOs. Oh, there's a beautiful picture right there. Okay.
Right.
Two scrappy old gay ladies. Okay. Now we decided that, by God, we wanted people to know if they were looking at our books. If they're sitting up there at that panel and they're thumbing through our book, we figured we'll make sure people know it was made by a couple of girls. We made the front cover bright pink. You could flag it an aircraft with this thing. Right. Fluorescent pink.
Nice. That's great. Oh, man. Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you a horrible story. I had just sent the stuff down there. It had been about 2 weeks. I knew they had been delivered because I was looking at the Postal Service tracking codes, right? I knew they had been delivered. And I figured, okay, we'll see what happens. Well, last week, I'm walking down the hall of my apartment complex, and I look out the parking lot, and there's 6 police cars parked behind my car. 3 from the township, 1 was the county sheriff, and there was a state police car there, and they're all parked behind my gray Elantra. I'm going, oh my God. Oh my God, where are the men in black? They've come for me. Actually, it turned out that one of our neighbors saw our apartment complex is a private cul-de-sac. And one of our neighbors saw a drug deal going down in the parking lot. And she called in 911 and said, you better bring in support for that one cop car. And next thing, the place is loaded with cops, right? Oh, wow. So this is what my heart started pounding when I thought, oh my God, where am I going to sleep tonight?
Yeah, they're coming for you.
That's what I worried about, But no, at this point in the game, I don't worry about it. What's goofy is I brought up a thing the other day with some people. I said, if you noticed in the last couple of weeks, the whole topic matter has fallen off the news cycle. I have reached out to major newspapers. I've got data. I send them a nice little fact sheet. Crickets. I've reached out to major networks. Crickets. I've got a little meme I put up on Facebook that said, if only 1% of 167,600 would be this amount, a year, this amount a month. And it worked out to 70 sightings a month for 240 months of the 20 years. This isn't that, and the bottom line says, isn't that newsworthy?
Well, sure. Why do you think? Why do you think that it's working like that? Why do you think that they trickle this information out there, put it in our consciousness, and then we just withdraw, and it's not even a peep anymore?
The usual suspects told me after that UAP report came out that there was a war going on over in the Pentagon. Okay, there were the people who wanted to put it all out there, and there are people who did not want to put it out there. Okay. And I don't think that war has settled out yet, because I can tell you something else here. I just literally read this afternoon. A reporter came to me and asked me my opinion of this. And I thought to myself, you know what's happened? All those newspapers have been either going out of business or being bought up by a couple of conglomerates. It used to be like 6 major companies owned all the newspapers and radio stations. It's down to about 3 or 4 now.
Right.
And the CIA once boasted it had somebody on the payroll at a high level in every one of them. So I got a funny feeling they reactivated the those of you who drank the Kool-Aid thing, put a lid on this. Don't print this stuff. Now, before that happened, myself and the state director from MUFON here in New York State were the front page story in 7 upstate New York newspapers. Okay. They were all owned by Gannett, which owns USA Today, and the Binghamton paper released it. And then it showed up in all these other either city or county papers, including my hometown paper. I had people I haven't heard from for almost 50 years. We're having our 50-year class reunion. I had classmates sending me the front page of the hometown paper, and there I was, right on the front page.
Oh, nice.
This is a couple of weeks ago, so it was kind of fun. But nationally, I've reached out to USA Today. I've reached out to the New York Times. I've reached, and they did a story on me a couple of years ago, but I reached out to the Times. I reached out to New York Daily News. I went to the Boston Globe. Reached out to the LA Times, reached out to the Seattle Intelligencer. They did a story on me a long time ago. Crickets. It's somebody drank the Kool-Aid and somebody jerked their chain.
Yeah.
It's just absolute science. Cannot get them interested in an article. Now, I did have, you know what Gaia TV is?
Yes. I live right next door to them.
Okay. Oh, you're in Colorado, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've been down. Hey, they flew me out there in August during the lockdown.
Oh yeah,
to be on George Norrie's show.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, I got one of their guys reached out to me and flagged me on a Politico article from the news service in DC called Politico, and the headline was, "They want people to take them seriously. Space Force may be weary of taking over the UFO mission. They don't want to take it. It's too much stigma." It's like a 7-page report. Space Force doesn't want it. All these other services, special functions and intelligence groups, they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Oh, there's too much stigma. We'll get too many jokes. We're a serious organization, Hey,
right.
If you didn't want a stigma, you shouldn't have stuck the rest of us with the stigma. That's my attitude on this.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely. Now, before we move too far away from,
Wherever.
are these things a threat or not? I want to get your thoughts on the abduction.
Don't believe so.
Well, the abduction aspect of it. The
Okay.
people who report negative experiences. Now, this is assuming that abduction experiences are even connected to what we're seeing in the sky. We don't know for sure.
Experiencer events are real. Now they come in kind. The people who actually got a free trip on the UFO. Okay, there's those kinds. Where they probably got probed and somebody took their eggs, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But okay, back in 2013, I had only been writing the column for a couple of months, and I had press credentials. I was at a major UFO conference, and I noticed that in the morning, everything at a big conference starts about 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay. That's when all the big plenary events get going.
Yep.
This organization had at 7:00 in the morning till about 8:30, an experiencer meeting session. It was sort of like an AA meeting for experiencers in the morning,
Right.
Hi, I'm Bob. I was abducted. Hi, Bob, that kind of thing. And so they said press wasn't welcome. So I went and talked to the shrink who was the moderator for this thing. I said, look, I'll leave my credentials upstairs. I just want to come and learn. I can't write about that. I won't write about your people, but I can't write about the topic sanely if I don't understand it. I said, fine. Now, I half believe some of these, I've been probed kind of stories. Okay. And so I went in there expecting to meet 25 or 30 people who were crying in their coffee. They got probed.
Right.
I get in there. It's 150, 175 people. And this thing's got the energy of a tent revival.
Yeah.
They were up. They were happy. Those folks are great. And they want us to take care of our planet. Yay. That kind of thing. And then people gave personal testimonies of what happened to them, that kind of thing. And that opened my eyes a lot. Are they there's a bunch of things happening. There are people that are having what they think is a experience or event on board a ship, and it's actually happening in the form of ET touching them telepathically during deep REM sleep. And they kind of set up at your dream scenario, kind of a dreamscape, holodeck kind of thing for you to try you out or see how you react in certain situations, that kind of thing. There are people who have been taken aboard. And though you don't hear that many of those kinds of stories that much, although I have interviewed my share of women who probably, I would say 4 that I've talked to in the last 10 years that told me that they had hybrid children, and they've been brought aboard to actually see the children and hold them and all that kind of thing. Yeah. And, little grays that have a family resemblance kind of thing to you, that kind of thing. And I've had several of them tell me that kind of an account. And it was very eye-opening. Then the other kind of experience or thing that me and Tom Conwell kind of talked about was that there seemed to be patterns of sightings that really didn't match up to any of the things he was researching. Okay. Going over certain cities. People say, well, if they've got all the stealth capability, why are they turning on their lights?
Right.
And it seems to be, and if you see something like this, it changes you. As my Lama used to say in the Buddhist monastery, an event like that will expand your view of reality. It'll make it a little bit more elastic. Okay. Yeah. All right. So there was a poll a couple of years ago. 2017 was the first time I saw this number. It was done by Fox Pictures before they released the movie that was a horror movie set against the Phoenix Lights, that kind of thing. Okay. But they had the same statistics. Oh, some kids got abducted and never seen again, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There were all the typical statistics. 36% say they believe, 43%, 46% say they're on the fence, and 17% say it's baloney. Okay. But they also had a different metric. They asked how many people say they have seen a UFO. And the number came out about 16.5%. I wasn't too comfortable with the number because I'd never seen the metric before. 2 years later, in September 2019, the Gallup poll did a similar study, and they came back with that 16 and some change percentage. Well, 16% of the adult population is approximately 40 million people. Now, 40 million people, that essentially makes them 40 million experiencers. If you think about it, because it changes you. And one of the things the Free Foundation found, Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation, if you talk to Ray Hernandez.
I have a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay. You talk to him and he'll tell you that He's known agnostics who have been touched by ET and they come back spiritual. He knows heavy Bible thumpers that come back spiritual. Okay.
Yes.
And his remark to me once, a couple of years ago at the Ozark convention, was ET's turning us into mystics.
Yeah, that's the next kind of aspect I wanted to cover is the consciousness connection to, not
Big
only
deal.
ET experiences, but what we're seeing in the sky. We can, think about something, ask them to do something, like Mr. Hernandez was saying that he wanted to prove to a friend that this was something. He says, okay, blinking the light like that's not going to do anything. You really need to put on a show. And all of a sudden it starts, going crazy, putting on a little light show for him. Yeah. And immediately, whenever he thought that. So there's a connection there, and it's very important.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I knew about this stuff with people with psychic ability, calling them back in 66. We had a kid in our school who was very, very heavily clairvoyant. Okay. And Clyde, the goofy thing about him was one that we used to play kick the can in the street until the street lights came on, and we're sitting on our neighbor's porch. And one night he says, you read about those UFOs down in the city down the road? And I says, yeah. He says, I can call them. Oh, yeah, really? Right. He lays his head down, kind of goes into a little meditative mode. And he says, there, I called one. We said, yeah, okay, fine. That front porch was the front porch of my shop teacher. Okay, from school. Next morning, I'm out in the front yard with the dog, and Mr. C invites me over. He says, I got to show you something. He opens up the morning paper. He says, see this report? UFOs seen at treetop level in the north side. And he lists a couple of addresses where they were reported. And they were like within 2 blocks of where we were. And we're going, whoa. So our nickname for Clyde after that was the UFO Whisperer. Okay. Yeah. Now, since that time, you get guys that are part of this. We got a couple of really active CE5 groups around here, and they call them suckers down. And I'm really quite impressed. I've even coached them on their meditation stuff since I lived in a monastery. So, when you meditate for CE5, don't eat pepperoni pizzas in advance. Don't eat it with onions, don't eat it with garlic, because it'll make you burpy and it's not good for meditation. I taught them all this stuff we knew,
Oh, nice.
But the thing is, it's serious. And there is a very large group of people right now that are trying to become citizen diplomats to ET. If the government won't speak up for us, it's up to us to speak to them.
Yeah, I have noticed that. And why not? I've had my own contact experience, and it was because I went out and sought it out myself through meditation. I had a conversation with a few entities, it changed my view on everything, changed my whole life. But it was because I sought it out.
It will.
And another thing,
you clear people don't understand it. You clear your consciousness of all the Western monkey chatter we have in our heads. Turn off your phone or lock it up in the car and go out and sit under the stars and just quiet your mind, and they come.
Yeah, and it's a very personal experience. It's not something that anybody's going to experience. I think that if you're ready, if you seek it out, if you're I think it has a lot to do with your spiritual readiness and your consciousness at the time. Then maybe it might happen for you.
And a little bit of being ballsy.
Yeah,
say, do you really want to do this?
Right? Yeah.
But they're not abducting people. They're coming down. They're doing light shows. They're parking a spacecraft over the camp long enough for people to take a good long look. That type of thing. They're giving people visions. Some of it, it's not even a nuts and bolts craft. Some of it, they're calling in higher ascended beings, and they're coming down. Okay. Yeah. Which is really, really cool when you think about it. Now, having been, the yogi Buddhist, which is what I am these days, used to be a Buddhist nun. These days, I've been ordained a yogi. You're connected to everything, every living thing, everywhere, every when. The great consciousness, we are all part of it. We are swimming in consciousness all through the universe, kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi says. It binds the universe together, okay?
Right.
And the bottom line in the whole thing is that if you clear your mind and can it clear your mind enough to get rid of the distraction of your talk, what we call the talking self. Clear your mind to be connected with that tiny little voice in you. It's connected to everything. Christians call it the Holy Spirit. The witches call it the younger self, whatever. Once you clear yourself to hear that, you're wired into everything. And that's the experience. And boy, when they hear your consciousness open up and say, welcome, great offerings of joy, come visit us, they come. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I don't see how this could be a negative thing with so many people, like you said earlier, becoming more spiritual, wanting to be a better person, having better lives after their experiences. I don't see how, and this could be a bad thing if this is occurring for people,
Yeah, agreed. And something along that line, there's, people will tell you there's a dozen different, there's all these weird beings and everything like that. There's Palladians, there's this, there's that.
Yeah.
Something that I'm irritated about. You see, if you sort of do a web search on images of reptilians, okay, all this artwork that is up there, and it's an agenda, if you ask me. They always show these reptilians all muscular and mean looking, like they haven't had a good lay at a gazillion years,
Right.
And excuse my French on that. The thing is the people that I've interviewed who have had friendships with reptilians that are here on this planet, they're the gentlest and most enlightened, humorous beings you'll meet. Something doesn't add up.
Yeah, I've heard different accounts about reptilians, but I have heard maybe close to half of some of the experiencers that I've talked to that have had experiences with reptilians say that some of them weren't that bad. So that's a very interesting aspect to
it's like anything
consider.
else. I could go out to a bar here, and there's going to be some nice people there, and there's going to be some people who probably want to knock my head off. So you got to take every being on their own merits.
Yeah,
even
definitely.
if they're from up there,
Yeah, and I learn more about this experience every day, and I don't know anything. I could completely change my view about what ET is, what a UFO is tomorrow, and it could be completely different than what it was yesterday. But it's an evolutionary type thing for me, and the way I used to look at things, even a couple of years ago when we spoke, is completely different than now, and it's probably going to evolve a lot as we go along. Now,
yes, it will.
I want to go back, because we got a few more minutes left. I want to go back to the statistics for a little bit. You mentioned weather is a factor. I thought that was interesting, too. Maybe you could go over some of the statistics involving weather. Is it bad weather that we're having less sightings?
No.
Okay.
No. Okay. If I'm drawing a graph, if I'm in a northern state, say New York State, Michigan, the New England states, you get a quiescent amount of sightings January through about April, May timeframe, and then they start to tick up a little bit. Okay. June, July, and August are through the roof. That's what the graph looks like. Okay. And then it starts trailing off in September, and then October, November, December are back down to that quiescent level. Okay. That's what a northern state looks like. Now, what's that quiescent level? That level of sightings? Dog walkers and smokers. Okay. They're out day in, day out, year round. Okay. Also, the people come outside for a smoke or something, or on a break or something like that. It's those people who are out every single day seem to be the ones who make those kinds of. In fact, the MUFON investigators have told me that when they go through a month's worth of sightings for their state, they search the text file for smoke or dog. Okay. And then Linda was working on the first book with me, and I was working on something else. I'd given her all the charts. I hadn't really looked at them. And she said, did you notice there's a latitude difference with the monthly numbers? I said, what? And she showed me. And if you move down to a middle level state, like say Virginia, and go across the country, states like Virginia, the number starts coming, that peak starts coming down, and the rest of those numbers kind of come up. And then when you go to the seriously deep South states like Southern Texas and Georgia and Florida, it's statistically flat and even probably has a little bit of a dip during the hot months because it's too hot to be outside. Okay. I used to live in Florida, and there's some months you just don't come out of the air.
Oh, yeah. I lived there 10 years as well. Yeah.
You know what I'm getting at? Hell, Washington, D.C. is like that to some degree. But so that's the difference with this latitude difference with the monthly numbers is where it was apparent. And a lot of people, very smart people, when we were working on charts, told me that monthly UFOs by month, that's stupid, you know. Well, we decided to keep it. And by God, it was an indicator. It told us what was going on. Who knew, you know? Same thing came up. We decided to plot our UFOs by hours of the day. Okay. And imagine a number that goes along like this from about 1 o'clock in the morning. Got a little bumps here, and then gets to about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, starts going up, and it peaks around 10 o'clock and then goes back down by 11:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. So 68 to 75% were in that peak between about 8:30 and 10:30. Okay. And while it's a little different shape, every state, different shape, the same overall profile is the same. Most of the sightings are between about 4:30 or about 5:30 at night to about 11:30 at night. Every single state. Now, where it's goofy is if you look down around 1 o'clock in the morning, down to about 6 o'clock in the morning, almost every state has a bump around 5 to 6 o'clock in the morning. Go to Arkansas, there's a bump at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, the chicken farmers down there told me, well, that's when we prep our birds for market. Who knew? They're outside. There's a bump in the weekly charts on Wednesday and Thursday. 76% of the states, their peak day of the week is Saturday. But there were about 12 states. It was like a Wednesday, Thursday kind of thing. And we had a couple of interns that worked for my spouse happened to look at those numbers and said, well, we're from the South. That's Bible study night. So if you're outside, you're coming home from Bible study, you're out in the parking lot in your car. Hey, honey, look at that. That kind of thing. But the hours of the day, if you look at that chart, there's a bump at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 4 o'clock in Las Vegas. That's when the clubs and shows let out. It's right. The hourly ones is also as much about human activity as it is ET.
Yeah.
Eye-opening stuff. It really was.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier that right now, we're having more sightings pretty much than we ever had before. And if this keeps increasing, this is going to be an undeniable phenomenon. Do you think that the majority of people are ready to acknowledge this, that we're not alone here?
The polls suggest, remember it said like 36% was for it, and 42 to 45% said, yeah, maybe, and 17% said, okay. Almost all the polls agreed. 80% believe the government's not being square with us and they want to know. So that seems to be about where it is. I have had, as a journalist, I have had letters for years from people. I'm 85 years old. I want to know the truth before I die. You wouldn't believe the amount of mail I've had on that.
Wow.
So, that's the deal. One other thing we noticed when we got those 16% numbers I told you about with the people say they'd seen, we were able to go back and calculate. It didn't add up. 40 million people, 45 million people, something like that, didn't add up with 167,000 sightings. Okay. So we figured out that golden number nobody ever knew before. How many people actually report a UFO? Now, when we cranked it against all the states, adult population against the amount of sightings reported, it was a bell curve. On the low end, it was 1 in 150. On the high end, it was 1 in 450. And the bulk of it was sitting up at 1 in about 200 to 250 up at the top of the bell. So we tell people 1 in 250 people reports what they see.
Wow, man, that is some awesome work with the statistics. Before you head
out, can I tell you one more quick? I know you got to leave here.
Oh no, yeah, go ahead. Take your time.
The last little point. This pink book, something we did with this, and this blew Linda away because I worked on it almost solo. Okay. She was the publisher and editor. So when I was ready to give her stuff, I told her, take a week of vacation. We had a weekend on each side and a week's worth of vacation. And I just started giving her stack of printout after stack of printout. What each thing was a chapter. And she started laying them out on the bed, on the kitchen table and coffee table and everything like that. And said, okay, this is going to go first. This is going to go second, that kind of thing. One of the things she was most impressed about was our secret sauce. In the first book, we just kind of said the numbers of where, the numbers of sightings for their years. What we did with this one, for each of the 29 definable shapes, we did a yearly chart, we did a monthly chart, we did an hourly chart. Okay, now for the skeptics who say UFO sighting, oh, they're just random noise. It's just random noise. Well, if it was random noise, it would be statistically distributed across all those pages. But when you look at a shape and it has an hourly pattern that looks like every other hourly pattern in the place, that's not random noise. Now, the individual UFO shapes, we did notice some things that are unique. Some of them really peak around 5 o'clock in the morning. Who knew? Okay. But the major peak was, later in the day, that 5 o'clock to about 8:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, that is super interesting stuff. Now, for the audience that is interested in finding out more, getting your books and following your work, what's the best way that they can do so?
Okay, I don't have a website anymore. The hackers and trolls took it down. Okay. So if you want the book, you go to Amazon.com, go to book, search, go up the books, the books tab, and you search for Cheryl Costa. Cheryl with a C, Cheryl, Costa, Costa. And if you go for Cheryl Costa, you'll see probably 3 books will come up. You'll see the 2017 UFO sighting staff reference. It's white with a flying saucer on the front. You'll see a book called The UFO Beat, which is all my columns for 7 years. Okay, if you want a nice read, that's a great book to have. And then you see this bright pink book with a white UFO on the front of it. That's the 2001 to 2020, and that's the one you want. It's a 430-page book. 2.7 pounds, already credited with 1 concussion.
Nice.
Somebody hit her husband over the head with it,
Oh man, that's a good credit though.
It's street cred. What the heck?
Yeah.
But it's a great book. It's a lot of fun. And here's the big thing. Here's what we're working on next. All the data we have amassed and cleaned up, if we tried to print it down to the municipal or local level, it would be over 1.5 feet thick or about 50 centimeters thick. Okay. Wow. We can't do that. So Linda and we have a rapid production process now. You do it with PDFs and you assemble the PDFs into one PDF and you got your book PDF. Okay. It's going to take us about a year, but we're going to dump out a certain amount every month. And what we're going to do is we're going to do all 50 individual state books with just the state statistics only, right down to the municipal level for the 20 years, all 50 states and all 29 definable shapes. There'll be 80 books along with our reference books and maybe a couple of analysis books we might write. Total, it'll be about 90 books. It will be probably under 2 years, probably within the next 18 months, it will be the largest collection of compiled publicly available UFO data ever published in human history, and that's when we're retiring.
Oh man, that's amazing. Definitely going to be looking forward to that. And Cheryl, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Excellent information as usual. Yep, we'd love to have you back on in the future.
By the way, if you decide you ever want to have a good long program on the paranormal, the psychic side of this whole consciousness side, invite me back to have just that conversation, and we can have one rip-roaring conversation. I guarantee it.
Oh, yeah, that sounds fun. Will do, definitely. All right, Cheryl, thank you for coming on. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening, and we will talk again tomorrow.